Let me introduce myself and kick off officially. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sophie. I'm one of the team at Westminster Business Council. And for those of you that are new to WBC and don't yet know us, WBC is London's premier business connections network. We've got a community of 10,500 businesses, from FTSE listed firms right down to exciting new startups, all part of our fantastic community. So our work at WBC is to support those businesses with opportunities to network, to find clients and referral partners. And our knowledge of different markets and our understanding of the business opportunities throughout our network mean that we've got that business intelligence to share with you and to share with our members. So we're also really committed as an organisation to helping our local community too, and we do a lot to support local education providers and students and young people that are looking for opportunities for work experience, apprenticeships, or even to start their own businesses. And we do that through something called the Ben Hughes Memorial Fund. Now, if that all sounds really interesting to you, do take a look at our website, or of course send me a message later on. I'd love to connect with you on a one-to-one basis and find out how WBC can support you and your business. But today I'm really delighted that we're joined by Jane Wakiwaka, the Head of Sustainability at the Crown Estate. Absolutely delighted to have her with us. And I just want to let you know how the structure of this evening is going to work. And we've also got the lovely Fiona Clark from David Miller Architects with us, and she's going to be conducting our fireside chat with Jane tonight. So after we go through some Q&A and some discussion, we're then going to break out into smaller rooms on Zoom so that you can get to know the other attendees and do some networking and support each other that way. And we're going to repeat that process a couple of times so that you've got plenty of chance to not only listen to Jane, get her fantastic insights into the industry, but also means that you get to meet lots of other people as well. And just a quick bit of housekeeping from me. It would be super helpful if you could rename yourself on Zoom, if you haven't already done so, your first name, last name, dash your business name. That way I can just know who we've got in the room and how we can get everyone up connected as well. That'd be really helpful. So Fiona, at this point, I'd really love to hand over to you to get the evening going.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Sophie. Well, thanks, Jane, again for spending the time with us this evening. Very grateful for that, and really looking forward to hearing more about sustainability at the Crown Estate. So our first question would be just to sort of set the scene, really. So could you tell us a little bit about, who the Crown Estate is and what kind of areas that you look after, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and really pleased to be here tonight and really looking forward to meeting and speaking with you all. So for those of you who don't know who the Crown Estate are, we are a purpose-led business. We're established by an Act of Parliament, and we have a very clear commercial mandate, and we are accountable to Parliament. So as part of that mandate, we're tasked with returning 100% of our net revenue profits to the Treasury, and that is for the benefit of the country's finances. And over the last 10 years, we've generated around about 2.9 billion. We have an incredibly diverse portfolio, which includes a 14 billion pound property portfolio as well. I'll comment to what that means in the central London context, but it also includes a range of retail and leisure destinations across the country, as well as a rural portfolio. And quite uniquely, we also act as the manager of the seabed and half the foreshore around England and Wales and Northern Ireland. So we play an incredibly unique and fundamental role in the development of sustainable development of this asset, and that includes supporting the UK's offshore wind sector, as well as marine aggregates, cables and pipelines. And as part of the UK PLC's net zero 2050 commitment, we are helping to support by unlocking over 40 gigawatts of clean renewable energy through our management and stewardship of our marine portfolio. We're also custodians of the Windsor estate, which includes the Windsor Great Parks as well. So a very diverse portfolio. Specifically within London, our ownership includes the entire freehold of Regent Street and about half of St James's, and that's a mix of offices, retail, residential and dining destinations, which hopefully you'll be very familiar with as well. And within that estate, we have over 600 office customers, over 250 retail and restaurant customers across 150 buildings, and that is around about 25,000 users of our space. And we get around 55 million visitors per year. And that's obviously pre-COVID figures, but we have a very, as you can see, a very extensive portfolio. And within that, we have done an extensive amount of development. We're active developers, and we have, in the last sort of 15, 20 years, had a very active development pipeline. And over the next 5 years, have a number of schemes on the go, which includes the second phase of the St James's Market regeneration, which is in partnership with our joint venture partners, Oxford Properties, which we received planning permission for back in December 2019. So as a business, incredibly diverse.
Wow. That sounds like a really busy job that you've got there. So I mean, the looking after the coastline and the wind farm alone, I mean, that to me sounds like the dream job for somebody who, you know, has followed a career in sustainability. So kind of out of curiosity, Jane, how did you get into to being in the role for sustainability? What led you down that career pathway?
Sure. I mean, it's a very personal reason for me to be involved in sustainability, and actually it kind of I came from the 1992 sustainable development, sort of that whole generation where sustainability really first came to the forefront in the summit there, and for me, I kind of grew up with the importance of what was kind of deemed global warming at the time, and kind of understanding the gravity and the importance of that. I wanted to really make sure that as a career, I wanted to have something that I strongly believed in. And for me, it was that strong sense of purpose that sustainability brought to me. And that's really kind of what drove me into working in sustainability, specifically at the Crown Estate as well. It was important that I worked for a company that had the same sense of value and purpose, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be working for an organization which puts sustainability very much at the heart of how we operate as a business, not just in our role within the offshore wind sector. You know, that's a great example, but even the way that we're looking at in terms of how we approach our real estate development and management. It's a real privilege to be able to work for an organization that really puts sustainability at its utmost agenda.
That sounds incredibly rewarding, and yeah, it's really nice to meet somebody who's, you know, it's that personal passion that's sort of driven them into that role. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I thought you might be able to help us with this evening is a little bit of kind of like demystifying, because I think most businesses and individuals have been trying to reduce their carbon, you know, very much really over the past sort of decade or so. And then since the government started sort of declaring the climate emergency, we hear lots of firms talking about, you know, their mission to become net zero, climate resilient, carbon neutral, or lots of these different kind of expressions. So could you explain to us what sort of that net zero actually means?
Sure, and I think you've touched on a really important point, which is we need to make sure that when we're speaking about you know, net zero or whatever it is, that it has to be accessible to the day person. And I think as sustainability professionals, we've been perhaps a little bit guilty in kind of coming up with lots of terminology which people don't necessarily kind of warm to. Ultimately, net zero kind of comes down, well, the difference between things like net zero and absolute carbon reduction, etc., that comes down to your scope of what you're assessing, right? So with net zero, essentially what it means is that the balance of what you are emitting is offset either through a carbon offset or some kind of sequestration. So it's essentially a netted difference. So you end up with a zero sort of baseline. I think things like climate resilience, they do, in my view, it's a bit broader than specifically covering carbon. We know that there are things around climate mitigation and adaptation that we need to factor in. So what are sort of the physical risks, whether it's kind of things like flooding, increased rainfall, urban heat island effect, etc. So it is broader in my view than what carbon specifically covers, but carbon is a huge part of what makes organizations a climate resilient business.
Well, that's certainly cleared up a few things for me. So actually, tell me, Jane, when you talk about sequestration, what does that mean?
The sequestration is basically activities that actively remove carbon from the atmosphere. So at the moment, a lot of the activities have been focused on minimizing emissions. So whether that's through energy efficiency or thinking about how we kind of have clean forms of technology, like wind generation, etc. But sequestration would be things like the role that the natural environment, so trees, etc., plays in actively removing carbon from the atmosphere.
Okay, great. So sort of forestation, that kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
The carbon. Okay, thank you. So given all of that then, I'm assuming that you must have set yourselves some targets at the Crown Estate. So do you want to maybe explain a little bit more about those?
Sure. So back in December of last year, we as the Crown Estate announced our ambition to become a net zero carbon business. And we felt that it was really important to set that statement out there because we felt it was important to lead by example. And what that net zero carbon commitment means to us is we're aligning to a 1.5 degree Paris proof climate agreement. And but we are very much looking at what it means to become a net zero business to 2030, but then how do we go above and beyond that and become climate positive, which is looking at that role of sequestration. I think when we set out this commitment, we did make this commitment knowing that we didn't have all of the answers, and I think that's we've been quite open and transparent about not having all of the answers, but we know that by setting this out, it's important that we work in collaboration with lots of different people across our industries and our sectors in order to deliver against this, and in particular that industry engagement to help identify those answers. What we are doing at the moment is looking at how we operationalize and activate net zero within the business. So that includes setting out plans, decarbonisation plans and targets across our real estate portfolio, how we look to address some of our scope 3 emissions, and really kind of bringing that to life.
Gosh, that's a very ambitious plan.
Yes.
But good to be ambitious on this topic, I think. So, out of all of the sort of the components of your strategy, then, what do you think is going to be the most difficult part of that to achieve? Is it the one that you lie awake at night thinking about, worrying about?
I mean, I won't understate the extent of and the scale of the ambition that we've set ourselves as a business, and I think it's making sure that we've prioritized. It's quite easy to kind of almost get paralysis in some ways, not knowing where to start. But I think we've just what I've been trying to do is how do we sort of identify how we do those priorities and make it accessible in a way that our colleagues can access and participate in. And I suppose for me it's kind of matching that level of ambition and kind of creating that community of practice within our organization, so that everybody is accountable and everybody has a role and responsibility to play in delivering against our ambition. But one thing I will say is that sustainability never sort of sleeps, so there's always something to do. So I suppose just the amount of the sheer volume of activity probably keeps me working quite late sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that's an interesting point that you say, because I'm sure that if you know your role as head of sustainability, and I'm sure you have other colleagues in your team who are very focused on that topic, but have you got any sort of like tips that you could share in terms of trying to engage other people who have very different roles within your organisation to get them on board and really bought into this agenda? Are there any sort of activities or I don't know, programs or initiatives that you've introduced to get people to buy in and support?
Sure. I mean, what I would say is that senior leadership is incredibly important, and we're very, very fortunate in that we have it's not just our chief exec, but the rest of our senior leadership team within the business is incredibly engaged and fully endorses our net zero commitment. And actually the process of us establishing and getting that buy-in was a fairly straightforward process because we had that buy-in. And I think having that endorsement right at the top level is really important. I think next is, how do you make this accessible? And some people aren't going to be technically minded in the way that some of my other colleagues are, and I think it's making it relevant to your day jobs. And as we're setting out the sort of how we operationalize net zero, it's thinking about how do we ensure that accountability sits with different people. So it's not the sustainability team to deliver net zero, but different roles and departments have a role to play. A great example of how we're doing that is, for example, with our external affairs team, we've been working very close in how we engage with industry, and it's pulling in their expertise and their ability to sort of build relationships with external stakeholders, for example, and thinking about how we then can help shape and support the wider industry's ambition to get to net zero. I think it's just finding out those opportunities to engage with different departments in a way that sort of is relevant to them.
Yeah. And just on a sort of a day-to-day basis in the office, although I guess obviously the challenges were not all in the office at the moment, but I'm just thinking about our office, trying to get some people to put things in the right recycling bin is quite a challenge. So I don't know if you've had any kind of, any ways that you've got of motivating everybody to kind of get on board with this agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably $1 million question, because it's how do you get people to care? And I think for me, it's about having that sort of almost that emotional or personal connection with sustainability that becomes important, because I think in the past we've kind of assumed that people will make rational decisions. It's the right thing to do something, as opposed to whether it's the easier thing to do, or I think for me, and the things that I've really enjoyed in my role is, how do I help and support people to make that personal connection, so that they're making that personal responsibility and decision to do the right decision. So if that is recycling, education is a huge part of it, but it's kind of how do you build that sort of emotional connection, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah. So me telling them off is probably not very encouraging, is it?
Some people respond to that. But
I tell them off in a nice way.
But and other people, I think you've kind of, we are operating in a very evolving landscape, where a few years ago net zero wasn't even really on the agenda, but I think social conscience and expectations, etc., are changing. So the vast majority of people know that they want to be engaged with it, and know that it's not just a matter of whether they have to. They want to be actively engaged. And the more that we have the majority kind of getting involved, I think the laggards will they'll kind of be forced to well, I don't want to use the word comply, but forced to kind of join in.
The right thing. Yeah, definitely. Lovely. Well, thank you very much for answering these questions and sharing your thoughts and experience with us, Jane. I think, Sophie, do you want to sort of do the breakout sort of session?